The HBO series Westworld takes place in a theme park, where guests can live out their Wild West fantasies using the autonomous robots called hosts. Hosts are programmed to act exactly like real people, but they can't harm humans, and they ignore anything that would make them question their world. The show explores themes of free will, the battle between right and wrong, and revealing who you truly are. But more importantly, it's about super cool AI robots becoming self-aware. So let's answer the question all of the millions of people watching the show were thinking. Hey, you know that 17th century philosopher? What would he think about all this? Maybe I should take a whole course on it? Nah. This is Descartes' Thoughts on Westworld. The first season of Westworld takes us through the host's journey through the maze, which in the show is a metaphor for the path to consciousness. The show tells us that because the hosts lack free will,
freeze all motor functions.
They therefore lack consciousness.
Doesn't get caught. Doesn't feel ashamed. Doesn't feel a solitary thing that we haven't told it to. You understand?
But how Descartes thinks about consciousness is different. However, for someone who loves things to be clear and distinct, the picture Descartes gives us of consciousness is far from either. In fact, in the Latin meditations, the adjective conscious only appears once, and the noun conscientia doesn't appear at all. But by sifting through the meditations, we can piece together three main aspects of consciousness for Descartes. Number one is transparency. It's the idea that I am aware of all of my thoughts, and I cannot be mistaken of whether or not I have a particular thought. Number two is reflection. It's the idea that any thought I have necessarily involves knowledge of myself. And number three is intentionality. It's the idea that my thoughts are available to me as if they are representing something. Intentionality is mostly important for Descartes' arguments that both God and material things exist, so we're going to leave it out for now. But if we focus on these traits, transparency and reflection, in the context of Westworld, we encounter a bit of an issue. Because Descartes says all thought is apparent and reflective. He also says fetuses and sleeping people have thoughts, and are therefore conscious. So if this guy is conscious, the hosts definitely have to be, right? I mean, Dolores can express complex feelings.
I think when I discover who I am, I'll be free.
Create works of art, and starts on a journey of self-discovery all by episode 1. I've almost graduated, and I can barely do any of that. Descartes also said that manipulation of language would be a more than adequate test to tell the difference between a man and machine.
A host began to pass the Turing test after the first year.
The Turing test is a simple test of artificial intelligence. You have a conversation with the machine, and if you think it's human, it passes. If Descartes thinks language is the test of thought, the hosts more than pass.
What is your name?
Oh, Mr. Peter Abernathy.
Mr. Abernathy, what are your drives?
Tend to my herd. Look after my wife.
Your final drive?
Well, my daughter Dolores, of course.
So by Descartes' own test, they have thoughts. If they have thoughts, those thoughts are transparent and reflective. And that means they're conscious. So for Descartes, we don't even need the whole plot of this show? The hosts are already conscious before all of that? Awesome. I guess roll credits? Wow, that was a lot easier than I thought. Way easier than writing a research paper. What? He said animals didn't have thoughts? That means this video is going to go on for at least 2 more minutes, isn't it? Alright, so maybe this doesn't hold up. The guy who said animals didn't have thoughts thinks this thing is conscious? Probably not. Descartes probably wouldn't just want
Appearance of intellect, of wit. He wanted the real thing.
And the show makes it pretty clear that the preconscious hosts only have the former.
You can improvise a little, but most of what you say was designed upstairs.
And if there's one thing I know, it's when I'm being fucked with. This can't possibly. You can't. I can't.
But even if Descartes would argue the hosts don't truly manipulate language, we still have the problem of full mental transparency. It seems obvious that even we as humans aren't aware of at least some of our thoughts. How else then would I eat 2 quarts of Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia ice cream before I even notice? Because that's the case, we can easily imagine the host having thoughts but not being fully self-aware. But this had to be apparent to Descartes as well. I don't know. Did they not have Ben and Jerry's back then? How would he answer this? Allison Simmons, a professor of philosophy at Harvard, may have an answer. She argues that Cartesian consciousness is more nuanced than it appears at first glance. First, to him, some unconscious thoughts, like reflexes, aren't thoughts at all, but are programmed parts of the body that have influence on thoughts. And obviously that makes sense for a lot of what the hosts do as well. Simmons also says that Cartesian consciousness is not an all-or-nothing game, but instead has different levels. Sound familiar? Descartes may argue the hosts have what Simmons calls brute consciousness and not reflective consciousness. Brute consciousness is relatively modest, lower level. It's present in thoughts that require little cognitive work, like eating 2 quarts of Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia ice cream. Then there is reflective consciousness. It is most apparent when we have a thought about a thought, like, after I eat 2 quarts of Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia ice cream, I think, that idea was bad for me and everyone who knows me. Descartes would argue this is the level that has complete mental transparency. This makes sense in the philosophy of the show, because before the hosts begin their journey to consciousness, they essentially have 2 identities. One that is their character, that does things, and the other, essentially their programming, telling them what to do. But as they approach consciousness, those identities merge, and they finally recognize their thoughts as their own.
It was you. Talking to me. Guiding me.
The key for hosts to reach reflective consciousness? Recognizing
Myself.
they finally put the I in I think therefore I am.
And who I must become.
At that point, we could probably say Descartes would declare them conscious just as much as the show would.